Well, what I'm going to do today is introduce our chair, Professor John Eikenberry, and I'll leave it to him to do the rest of the hard work. We're very fortunate to have Professor Eikenberry in the UK at all at the moment. He's the Albert G. Milbank Professor of Politics and International Affairs at Princeton in the Department of Politics there. And he's also co-director of Princeton's Center for International Security Studies and co-director of the Princeton Project on National Security. But he's got a thing about Oxford, it seems. He was the 72nd Eastman Professor at Balliol College, Oxford, a few years ago, and he's currently over in the UK for another year at Oxford as a visiting fellow at All Souls College. And he's written a number of books, and he's served in various capacities advising the US government, but I won't go through all the details, and I'll leave it to you, John, to introduce our main speaker.
Thank you, Jason. Well, it's great to be here and welcome everyone to this special evening. This is my first visit to the Dialogue Center, and it's great to be here and to introduce our guest speaker. And before I do that, I was asked to sort of set the stage a little bit by saying a little bit about the world historical moment that we're in, to kind of set the stage for a discussion of Japan and the relationship that Japan has with its neighbors and with the United States, but to do so starting from kind of a global perspective. And so let me just say a couple words, and most of it quite obvious if you read the newspapers, and that is simply to state the obvious, that we really are moving into an era of global disorder. This is a new moment that seems to be much more troubling, fluid, uncertain than any moment in international order history in recent memory. Almost all the institutions, regional orders, strategic relations are breaking down. Trade and the WTO, NATO and security alliances more generally, climate agreements are not moving forward. The G7, the G20 are troubled. Arms control is moving backwards, and human rights, such as it is, are entering a time of troubles, arguably. The new watchwords for international order are uncertainty, instability, fragmentation, decline, nationalism and populism, and walls, as we will discuss today. I think there are three big shifts going on in the international system that's creating this turbulence. One is a shift in the global balance of power. We're witnessing a long-term historic shift, which is really we can describe as the rise of China. It's not the global south, it's not BRICS, it's not Brazil and India and South Africa, it's really China. Historians argue that these power transitions are difficult moments, often dangerous. We think of the very first scholar of international relations, Thucydides, writing about Athens and Sparta. It was a power transition moment that caused that war. More recently, of course, Britain and Germany at the beginning of the 20th century. So as China grows more powerful, it will want to do more, it will have more capacity to influence global outcomes, and countries like the United States will feel threatened. Their long-standing position in the region and globally will be put at risk. And countries, and this is important, across the region and around the world will begin to rethink, hedge perhaps, but rethink their alliances and alignments. A second global transition I think is going on is what we might call the problems of interdependence, which are not becoming simple, but quite the opposite, becoming more complex and fraught with difficulties of generating cooperation as they cascade forward. States may be becoming more national, but their transnational connections are growing. Climate change, financial interdependence, the spread of WMD, refugees, health pandemics, all those sorts of things are creating more demand for governance, even as our ability to supply it seems to be going down. And then finally, the West, led by the United States, seem to be entering a period of instability, national inwardness, Trump, in addition to that, seems to be stepping back from historic American commitment to supporting as a kind of first citizen of a global order in which it supports institutions, upholds alliances, champions international organizations, acts as a kind of global system organizer. So now, in some sense, the U.S. is a global system disorganizer, and that's new. And I think in large part, the outside world for the last 70 years has been accommodating itself to that kind of U.S.-led order, either working around it, taking advantage of it, supporting it, in various ways, premising their strategies on its continued existence, and they can no longer do that today. And in some sense, that is what I wanted to kind of provide as a kind of framing point, the uncertainties that are, seems to be structurally creating new pressures for states across the world, and certainly in East Asia, to rethink their relationships. So now I come to what I really wanted to do, which was introduce our speaker. 3 weeks ago, I received an email from Ms. Ota of the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation asking me whether I would be able to introduce the keynote speaker at the annual seminar this year. When I saw that the speaker was none other than a dear friend and colleague, Naoki Agawa, I was totally thrilled. Thank you, Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation, for giving me this opportunity to get to know you, your guests, and this wonderful chance to share the podium with my dear friend here on this side of the pond. This is a memorable way for an American to spend, yes, Thanksgiving Day. It's also good to be with you again, Professor Agawa. I think the last time we were together was in crisp and beautiful Kyoto in January of this year. Thanks for inviting me to speak for what I think was probably more of this kind of discussion, the crisis of the international order at your university. It was a wonderful occasion to discuss the world situation. So, I'm sure you tonight have seen Professor Agawa's CV, and it's unbelievably impressive. And what strikes most people immediately is how much he does so many different things, and importantly has reinvented himself, it seems to be every 10 years or so. He has held key positions in the corporate world, in government, in academia. He's a prolific writer of 18 books, and I think there's another one coming up. There always is, and a contributor to newspapers and a presence on television as well. What I personally find inspiring about Professor Agawa are his vast interests, from his professional interest in American history and constitutional law, world history as well. Here is a man who is a font of knowledge on ships. Ask him about some immigrant ship that left Yokohama Harbor in 1958, and he will tell you about it. To railroads, he will tell you the best way to travel by train in Italy, to poems by Robert Frost, to his thoughts on an 18th century Japanese Buddhist monk. So we have in front of us tonight somebody very special. One of my fondest memories, I hope you remember this as well, this was several decades ago now, was spent with him when he invited my wife Lydia, who's here tonight, and me to visit the Self-Defense Force training ship. Was it the Kajima? Which was docked in Baltimore as one of its ports that it came to in its worldwide, round-the-world cruise that took 5 months, I believe. While we stood on the deck of the small ship looking out to the sea, I was able to feel the thought and get a glimpse of his adventurous, youthful, romantic passion to see the world and his quest for knowledge. He is truly one of the members of Minerva's Owls. The floor is yours.
I'm speechless. This is what Mr. Trump calls fake news. And I didn't know that John exaggerates this small to big thing. I don't know anything about 18th century Japanese monks. I don't know anything about Italian trains. I like them a lot, but I don't have enough time to go beyond the channel to take continental trade. In fact, I'm a great fan of British ships and British rails and British Royal Navy, and that's one of the reasons why I like coming here. I was asked by the Iowa Foundation, thanks also to Jason, Mr. James and Nana-san, to come and speak about politics, international politics. And actually, I am spending more time now on American Constitution history for two reasons. At this late stage in my life, although John was very kind to tell everybody that I have diversity of interest and varied lots of interest in ships and nothing like that. I think it's about time that I can claim that I know something more deeply than my knowledge about ships. And number two, there are a lot of newer generation Japanese scholars and experts who know a lot more about what's really happening between the United States and Japan in terms of security, economy, and that kind of thing. As long as you talk about Madison, James Madison, in the 18th century, you're safe. Or my son said once that, Daddy, you're cheating. Why am I cheating? Because you are teaching American Constitution history about which nobody can tell whether you're telling the truth or not. And I'm teaching Japanese Constitution in the United States where nobody can tell whether I'm telling the truth. That's the point. That's what I'm going to do today. But let me just spend about 20-25 minutes to expand upon what you kindly showed to us, the global picture, and apply that to a particular situation vis-a-vis Japan. Japan's relationship with Mr. Trump's America. And it's a sort of an interesting case study. And I don't guarantee that everything I say is right, but this is the way that I take it now. So let me just move to here. And because I hate PowerPoint, and I think it's also very stupid of some scholars to use PowerPoint to show letters, because you can't read from the distance and it's boring. But because of the time, I had to sort of organize my thought in the form of PowerPoint. So I will try to, you don't have to read this, but I will just follow this outline to go through what I want to say today. If you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll try to answer as much as possible. Just let me try to spend about 20 minutes or so. It says new approach to security, and the question is whether Japan has a new approach to security, whether Japan can have a new approach to security. And let me try to think about it as I speak. But first of all, Mr. Abe and Mr. Trump, they met. Trump met Abe, or Abe met Trump. And it was very early in terms of Mr. Trump's term as the first term, well, first term, or maybe not. So they may not be the second, or they may be. I don't know. I can't.
We can discuss that.
He became the president of the United States, and Abe went to meet with him even before that. In fact, shortly after he was announced, he was elected as president in November 2016. And in fact, the data that I have is that on 17 November 2016, Abe was the first head of state of any major country to go to New York and meet with Mr. Trump at the Trump Tower. Why so? Because he was, as I understand it, I think this is in public knowledge. If not, I will not be punished, so that's fine. He was planning to be in New York to meet the president-elect Clinton. And he planned the trip already. So the question is, what are you going to do about this trip? And apparently there was a lot of discussion within the Japanese government. And they decided that Mr. Abe will go to New York anyway. But they didn't know how to get in contact with anybody in the Trump camp. So I don't know the real story, but somehow they, according to one theory, Ambassador Sasaya was very instrumental in finding somebody to contact. And so he went. And plus the fact that somebody very smart found out that Ivanka's daughter, Trump's granddaughter, was very fond of then very popular anime or something, Pikotaro. And so Ambassador brought out sort of a video or something about Pikotaro. Ivanka was very pleased, the granddaughter was very pleased, and Trump was very pleased. So they met, and apparently this went very well. And Trump liked Abe. This was very important for Japan because during the time that he was running for the presidency, he talked about possible withdrawal of US troops from Japan. He said that the US-Japan alliance is not fair, that the United States is obligated to come to defend Japan if anything happens, but Japan is not obligated to come to the United States to defend the United States. It's not fair. I mean, that's the word that he doesn't like. It goes like this. Not good. And he also mentioned the fact that he doesn't care if Japan possesses nuclear arms. Korea, feel free to do that. North Korea is your problem, not ours, kind of thing. There is a specific New York Times interview on that thing, and I reread it, and it was quite clear what he was talking about. So there was a lot of concerns on the part of the Japanese as to whether he really means that or not. And for that reason, I think that the Japanese government found it very important for Mr. Abe to get connected to Mr. Trump early on. And so he went. I think that Mr. Trump appreciated the fact that when everybody was in a coma or in a state of shock that Mr. Trump was elected, he was very pleased. Somebody like Abe came to see him. And that set the stage for a very good start, fortuitous start for both Trump and Japan. Shortly after he was inaugurated, they had a joint statement. Abe came back to Washington and had the first official meeting between Prime Minister of Japan and President of the United States. And the joint statement says as follows: the unshakable US-Japan alliance is the cornerstone of peace, prosperity, and freedom in the Asia-Pacific region. The US commitment to defend Japan through the full range of US military capabilities, both nuclear and conventional, is unwavering. That's very, very different from what Trump as a candidate indicated earlier on. So I think that Japan had a sort of sigh of relief. Okay, he's going to stay committed to the Japan alliance. And so that was a sort of fortuitous start. To make it short, to make the whole story short, I think he's beginning to change that line. And not that he's sort of becoming less committed to the alliance, but he now has another agenda with Japan, that's trade and economy. And so that is something that I am noticing. So how does Trump approach Japan? I think in terms of geopolitical and security front, he is both bilaterally and multilaterally committed and together with Mr. Abe, particularly because of his current relationship with or confrontation with China. I think in order to deal with various China policies, that he needs Japan. Also, United States of America per se, Mr. Trump himself thinks that in terms of North Korean situation, Japan, United States, South Korea have to work together. So the alliance is the pillar. I know that there are some experts on this thing, so I would love to have some comments from experts in this audience, but I think that's the reason. And most recently, Vice President Pence and Mr. Abe were at the APEC meeting in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, and they shared this concept of free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, and that's how they are together. On the other hand, on the trade and economic front, for some reason, and I would like to have John's comment on this thing, he wants to deal with Japan on a bilateral basis, while he's dealing with Japan and Far Eastern situation in a multilateral way and bilateral way. He wants to talk about trade and economy and investment and everything there on the basis of the America First thing. And the joint statement issued earlier this year at, I think on September 26th and 2018. This is the beginning of our beginning to worry a little bit about U.S.-Japan, a little bit more about U.S.-Japan relationship. Very different from the first joint statement in January of 2016. It says initially, on the occasion of our summit meeting in New York on September 26, 2018, we, Prime Minister Abe and President Trump, affirmed the importance of a strong, stable, and mutually beneficial trade and economic relationship. Now, they did talk about security affairs and security relationship, but the first thing that we talked about is trade and economy, which is a major change from the previous one. And they continue to on, and then there are some sort of signs, and that's the way I look at this thing, that while Trump is trying to emphasize that Japan-US trade and economic relationship is unfair from America First point of view, Abe is very subtly trying to bring that back to multilateral approach. It says, for instance, I think that they had lots of drafting negotiations and talks. I'm sure that we don't get to see that kind of thing. But the president reiterated the importance of reciprocal trade as well as reducing the trade deficit with Japan. And Prime Minister emphasized the importance of free, fair, and rule-based trade. And there are some interesting sort of differences, nuances there. Moreover, they agreed to start negotiations following the completion of necessary domestic procedure for a Japan-United States trade agreement on goods, as well as go on other key areas, including services that can produce early achievements. I don't know what the early achievements do mean, but here again, there's subtle differences between the first part of the sentence and the latter part. Japan-United States trade agreement on goods, one, and as well as on other key areas, including services, two. Apparently, Japan is trying to limit the trade negotiation on goods only, while Trump is saying we have to talk more about investment, services, and all sorts of things. In particular, there are two sort of conflicting ideas to follow. The agreement mentioned above is designed to be mutually beneficial, and with respect to positions of at the other government for Japan with regard to agriculture, forestry, and fishery products, outcomes related to market access as reflected in Japan's previous economic partnership agreements constitute the maximum level. What does that mean? We made a lot of concessions during the TPP negotiation. No more. Trump says, for the United States, market access outcomes in the motor vehicle sector will be designed to increase production and jobs in the United States in the motor vehicle industry. He's talking specifically about American cars. Trump is saying that Japanese should buy more American cars. We have enough Toyotas and Nissans and but he says that. So we are beginning to have negotiations on these things very soon. And it's interesting that when they had a joint statement, and then Abe began to talk about TAG, trade agreement on goods, while the Americans say that we are not aware of what's abbreviated word called TAG. We are not aware of it. That's an FTA, free trade agreement, indicating that Americans and Japanese have agreed to talk about not only goods, but also services, and trade barriers, and non-tariff barriers, and all sorts of things. It's going to be a challenge for Japan to begin to discuss this thing. Trump, I think, as I recall, said that we are not going to impose this proposed tariff thing, 25% increase now because I like Abe. But he said, well, I think the American position is that we will continue to talk about it. I think this pressure will increase. So there's a sort of exactly the way that you described with respect to Japan, US, there is a sort of a symbolic, and I think TAG is the word Abe invented after the joint statement, to show to the agricultural sector in Japan that you made a lot of concessions. I promise that I will not go further. That's a very politically difficult position that Abe has to keep. Now, so Americans say FTA, bilateral. And Japanese say, well, we agreed to talk to you one by one, but that's TAC. By the way, you should come back to TPP. We're now TPP 11, but you should come back. Let's try to reform WTO because you don't like it. We will work together. In fact, the joint statement was issued only between Trump and Abe, but also some Europeans agreed to work with Americans and Japanese to reform WTO. Japan has a new thing called RESET. I remember exactly what that stands for. Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes China. And so it's trying to find a sort of a more multilateral way of dealing with it, while America says, no, this is bilateral. So this is a sort of a source of tension between Japan and the United States. Now, so I hope I'm not jumping too abruptly to the future of alliance based upon just this mere sort of sense of friction between Japan and the United States. Now, we are not yet able to figure out how the bilateral trade agreement negotiation will go on. Minister in charge of this thing is Seko, who is Minister of Economic Affairs, and he's going to talk to a famous sort of a protectionist-oriented USTR Lancaster. So we'll see. But I think that my sense is that short to mid-term, the alliance is strong, solid, and robust. Robust, that's the word. But long-term, I think as John pointed out, there are some reasons for uncertainty. Uncertainty is the word that Professor Abe used just minutes ago. that even with respect to relatively good relationship between Japan and the United States vis-a-vis Trump versus Abe, there are some uncertainties. Number one, regardless of whether Mr. Trump will be the president of the United States for another 2 years or another 6 years, I think there is an increasing tendency on the American general public to be reluctant for more overseas commitment. And this is not new. I think that this started with President Obama. And Trump, in a way, is continuing that reluctance. And as a politician, he cannot ignore that. Now, I think that deep down, Mr. Trump's generation still has harbored this feeling that the alliance is not totally fair because we are sending people, Japan is not sending people. We're committed, or we have been committed to world peace and security, peacekeeping, while Japan is sort of not doing that much. Allegedly unfair burden and cost share. What some Japanese worry, fear about is that with the Mr. President, nobody can tell what he's going to do next, but I think that he may have a deal with our Chinese friends, and North Korea is not very clear as to what's really happening, and that the America may be changing their position vis-a-vis North Korea in terms of what is verifiable, what is complete denuclearization. Already there are some friends of mine in Japan academia who say that maybe the name of the game is shifting. So that means a lot to Japan, and that's a sort of a sense of friction. And what we worry about is this back into 1980s and 1990s, that there may be more linkage, regardless whether we mean that or not, between security and trade. So these are the things that we worry about. How much did I spend about? I don't know. Is that all right? I mean, I told you.
Sure. Yes, I think another 15 minutes.
Oh, really? That much? You should have talked more. He's the main speaker.
No, I just stumbled in here.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
Options for Japan. So what should Japan do? And theoretically, I think there are 4 or 5 possible options. I'm not saying that these are all possible, or we'll be able to choose one. But basically, the main line of thought is stay the course. Maintain the alliance as a pillar of Japan's security policy. Number one. This is the policy that we have been taking over the past 60 years, or maybe 70 years. But that's, I think, is the thing that we're probably going to continue to do this. As a matter of hypothesis, let's skip the second one. I realize that there are some Chinese friends of us here, but sort of we say, okay, America is not that totally dependable, and China, you're a great country. So we'll go back to the sort of Chinese world, Finlandization of Japan. Tributary is probably a too strong a word, right? But I would say that some Japanese are beginning to say that we have to be friends with China, period. And that's another possibility, or possible, theoretical possibility. Number 3 is neutral and no ally Japan. Okay, we don't have anybody to be really having an alliance with, so why not we become more independent, neutral, no ally Japan? And there are 2 versions of this thing, I think. One is with arms, with military capabilities, and the other is without the military capabilities. The latter is the sort of, old socialist sort of neutral Japan without any armed forces. It's a very idealistic idea. But the question is, can we survive without any GA tie and that kind of thing? And the former is this sort of nationalist, traditionalist, back to the Imperial Japan, Navy, Army kind of thing. Frankly, we don't have money nor resources to do that. And I don't think, frankly, I think it's a very good idea. So back to, of all the options, I think that there is only one solution. And that is that basically, somehow we have to keep the alliance. We have to stay the course. But having said that, maybe we should do some other things as well. And that is number two. Combination number one and number two is what that I would prefer. A new network of security arrangements. And here comes this sort of open and free and open Indo-China Pacific strategy. And that means that we'll be working more closely with our like-minded friends like India, Australia, and Philippines and Canada, and also France, interestingly. France has a fairly important presence in the Pacific. And now what's interesting to me is that there is an increasing cooperation between the Royal Navy and the Maritime Self-Defense Force. And I know that there are some experts on that right now. And I would like to have them comment on this thing. For the first time, and this is something that was unthinkable perhaps 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the British Royal Navy, as well as our Air Force, as I understand, flying together, navigating together, doing exercise together. Japanese like this idea, love this idea. Why? Because back in the Russo-Japanese War period, we had this Anglo-Japanese alliance. And it's a romanticized kind of thing. And some people are writing that great, this is a revival of the Anglo-Japan alliance. However, we have to be realistic. I don't think that the United Kingdom will be able to come all the way to the other side of the world to defend us. I think it's a more sophisticated thing. It's a sort of soft aspect of the alliance. How to do cyber, how to do space, how to do information technology. And in fact, I think that it's remarkable that the Royal Navy officer is now working in Japan within the Maritime Self-Defense Force, exchanging ideas and giving advice. Japan, for a long time, historically, has been a very pro-Anglo country. And everything that we know, anything about Navy thing, came from your country. They drank whiskey until 1945, on board. So that's what I think, a new network of security arrangements that we are very, Mr. Abe and his men are working on this very strongly. So this is a summary, and increase Japan's own defense capability, transform the alliance as a global system rather than regional thing, and develop a new security network with like-minded countries, maintain and increase Japan's presence in the United States. This that doesn't have anything to do with the military aspect of the relationship, but you go to Dallas, Texas, you realize that there are so many Japanese presence there. Toyota just recently newly opened the headquarters of Toyota America. It's a huge thing. And the Japanese investment, direct investment in the United States is probably number one among the G7 countries, and very much liked by local people. And that means some influence in the United States. And I think, in short, Japan has to remain strong and open, not necessarily as a big country, but for Japan economy, technology, defense, and diplomacy. There are some obstacles, and I will just mention the name. Demography. We are aging. By 2050, we will lose about 1/4 of the population. That means less and less, fewer and fewer Japanese young people. how is the self-defense force going to maintain the level of strength that they have? We are already having problem recruiting enough number of people, as I understand. There's also a very strong sakoku mentality. I sympathize with that. Why go out of Japan? We have good sushi in Japan. Why do you have to eat shepherd's pie coming? I think sushi is better. But we are really struggling with this idea, particularly this week and last week, about the newly proposed foreign workers law. And I just read that 65% of Japanese don't like that. And we're not used to being with foreign workers. And the truth of the matter is that there are a lot of Vietnamese and Nepalese and all those people working, but if we are going to seriously think about the future of Japan, more diversified, more racially mixed Japan, I think the Japanese pause for one moment as to whether we want to do that or not. Sakoku mentality comes in many ways. Pacifist mentality, traditional jingoism kind of mentality in all shapes. Constitutional reform, are we going to change Article 9 in a way? And I think lastly, when you think about the original intent of the alliance, that was to keep the area as safe as possible for Japan. And the United States was not only to defend Japan, but to keep the whole Far East. And Korea and Taiwan are particularly interesting and important. South Korea-Japan relationship, unfortunately, is in a fairly bad shape right now. And there are all sorts of reasons, but we are not cooperating. Koreans are free to hate Japanese. I don't mind it. I say sorry forever. But there is no reason why we cannot work together. That's the worry that I have. Okay, that I spoke too long, I think, but I think this is what I'm trying to say is that this is a time, as John pointed out, for Japan again to think about what we want to do and how to survive in this very new era, and not only to think about what Mr. Trump will do to Japan, but think about what we can do as Japanese. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There's a great deal to think about, to discuss, and what I might do is just have a little bit of a conversation here for a moment, and then we'll open it up in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Sure.
But one question, if I were trying to put myself in the shoes of a Japanese security decision maker, the policy planning, the strategic thinkers in Japan, one question I would be asking would be, is the America that Trump represents an aberration that's going to go away in a couple of years, or whether Trump is as much consequences as cause, and that he represents a new America. And as an American, I wish I knew the answer to this question. I don't know. I actually do have a view on that, but I'm wondering, is that one of the questions that your friends and colleagues in the Japanese foreign policy establishment are asking? And what is the current thinking on that? And is it evolving? Has it been evolving over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. They're having a lot of discussion as to whether this Trump's world, Trump's America, is going to be temporary or will last long. I think that the Prime Minister and his advisors function operating on the assumption that this will last, even beyond Trump. I think that it's not that Mr. Trump is changing the United States, but it's something in the United States that is sort of using Trump as a symbol. And we have to, regardless whether we like him or not, I have tried to like him, but not very much success. But he was elected through legitimate election. And then my Democratic friends may disagree with me, and there are so many issues as to how fair the election was. Trump said, and this Russia thing, I'm not in a position really to tell whether that's the case or not. Nobody seems to know right now. But we have to realize that, as far as I can tell, the election was approved by American people, and there is a fairly strong support for Mr. Trump. And that's a new America. That is, I think Trump wants to be remembered as a great president, and Trump wants to be liked by people. And so there are people who are pleased if Trump says to Japan, why are you not buying American cars? Or,
So, I mean,
and that's one thing.
so if Trump's America is here
to stay.
then
In some way.
Then the next question is, does that mean then we have to ask, what is Trump's America? But one version of it is the radical kind of withdrawal America. The other one is more, and I suspect Abe is kind of comfortable with this slightly different America, which is hard-nosed bargaining, reciprocity. What have you done for me today? It's not investing in a great relationship, but it's a kind of back and forth bilateral bargaining kind of Trump, and that, I presume, is the part of the new America that is probably something you can work with. But the second version of this, which is one way or another, the United States is going to find its way to leave the East Asian region. That would be a much more radical strategic shift.
Obviously, if I know the answer, I would be very happy and proud, but I don't know. But my way of thinking is that, given the fact that this will stay, if the assumption is that it will stay, first of all, when Mr. President became, or the President of the United States, I think that Mr. Abe early on decided, and his men decided not to criticize Mr. Abe at all. And not that they will always agree. Behind the scene they disagree with each other, but that's not to criticize him, because criticizing him doesn't produce anything with respect to this particular person. And then, whatever the Trump's America is, I think Japan is trying to do, through joint statements and other things, is two things. One is to persuade Trump's America that it's okay for you to insist upon trade talks and bilateral approaches, but Japan is doing all sorts of things to make America first possible through other means as well. Most notably, I think direct investment in Japan, and to convince Trump's America that it's a good thing to have Japan as an ally, so that they will come to a premature and wrong conclusion that America will be benefited by getting out of this alliance. I don't think that is something that the Americans all share. I think that the Americans do generally support the alliance with Japan. And so if that's the case, I think that there are some things that we can do. A more sort of nuanced alliance. But just in case, I think it's been very interesting that you have to have some other, not alternative, but other things that we have to do. It's interesting that over the past month or so, Abe is talking to Putin about the territorial issues, and nobody believes that Putin is so naive to return the islands to us. But I think that the fact that Abe and Trump are talking, not Abe and Trump, Abe and Putin are talking, indicates something. And this, that indicates is beyond me. Number two, China has been very friendly to Japan. Very surprising. Thank you very much, Chinese friends. All of a sudden, when faced with a very strong and direct and not very comfortable pressure of the United States, all of a sudden Mr. Xi is very friendly, smiling. Used to be that when he shook hands with Prime Minister Abe for the first time after many years, that he tried to avoid looking at Abe and shook hands like this for domestic consumption, I think. But now he's going like this and inviting thousands of businessmen and political leaders to China. Let's talk. We can do a lot of things. And our step includes China. And Abe said, and Abe's government said that we will be happy to be in talking to and working with the one band, one road thing. And so there are some new things are happening. India too.
That's great. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to throw it
Sure.
open. I'm going to resist asking the maritime question about Japanese Navy.
But there are some experts.
I think we're going to get some from the audience, but I'll ask just more of a general question. Looking over the next 50 years, what would you say are Japan's assets as a major state in the global system? What does it have that is unique and useful for it as it tries to establish its new position, to reestablish its position? And with just one little footnote, including things such as environment and energy, what is Japan's distinctive package of assets, in your view, for it to navigate the next 50 years?
That's a big question.
In 3 minutes.
I think that Japan does realize that we are declining power. And in terms of population and gross national product and everything else, I don't think that we'll forever be a very big and prosperous. And I think there will be many downturns, but we have to survive. And I think that in many ways that we would like to age gracefully. And no offense meant, but I think that we think that Great Britain has been doing that very well. And but at the same time, Great Britain is coming to an interesting point in history because they are now talking about Brexit. And Brexit is the possible sort of effort to get out of the previous mode to a new mode. Obviously, alliance is not about getting out of alliance, but in terms of the whole overall structure. And I think, setting that aside, I think that what we would like to do is a country which will continue to be very peace-oriented and continue to be friendly with most other countries, that it will not choose to use force as much as possible other than defense. Continue to be good at certain things that we have been very good at: technology, work ethic, sort of a social order, fairly civilized society, without extreme ideologies, either right or left, who will assassinate people or use bombs. And you go to Japan and you get the sense that this is a fairly quiet, fairly polite society, safe, and that's partly because we're an island country, and we are going to begin to face a new phase where we cannot be isolated, and we have to be open, and people begin to worry whether we will be faced with the kind of immigration issues, that kind of things that the European countries are now going through. But hopefully we'll be able to be not a big country, not a superpower, but that continues to contribute to the welfare of the region as well as welfare of the world. And I think that our military forces should be able to do that. I think that we have lots to share. And Chinese friends of ours are trying to learn how we manage the pollution and the environment and that kind of things. And I think that I will be a happy Japanese citizen before I die if Japan continues to be able to do that for the next 50 years or so, although I think I'll be gone by then.